Hey, food friends, and welcome to the Food Founders Podcast, your number one spot to get mentoring, guidance, and behind the scene learnings to help you understand what it really takes to launch, grow, and scale your packaged food or beverage business. On the show, you'll hear from food founders at various stages of growth, and you'll hear from me and my 14 years of packaged food and beverage experience. Each episode is packed with insights, inspiration, and learning to help you on your food business journey. I'm your host, Ainsley, and this is the Food Founders Podcast. Before we jump into today's show, I want to thank our sponsor, the Food Brands That Sell program. Food Brands That Sell is a 6-week deep dive into the CPG industry and teaches you how to win within that industry by creating a brand that you, retailers, and consumers love. Here's what a recent alumni had to say about the program. I am so grateful that I chose to do Food Brands That Sell. I learned so much about myself, my journey, and my company. These 6 weeks changed how I'm doing my business, and I can see the difference already. I no longer feel alone. If you aren't already on the wait list, hop on over to foodbrandsthatsellwaitlist.com or grab the link below to make sure that you are first to know when the program is accepting new students. All right, let's dive into today's episode. Hey, everyone, and welcome to the Food Founders Podcast. Today, I'm excited to be chatting with the founder of Agricycle, Josh Scheffner. Josh has created not just fantastic brands, but a movement, ingredients, and really an inspiring way to do business. So I'm excited to dive into this today and hear more of the story and share that with everyone. So Josh, welcome to the Food Founders Podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ainsley.
Josh, could you just open it up by sharing with everyone, what is Agricycle and what are you guys all about?
Yeah, so Agricycle closes the gap between smallholder farmers in developing economies and global markets by democratizing access to the agriculture value chain. What that actually means is that there's a lot of people that can't access global markets if they're a small farmer in a remote area because they don't have the processing capacity where they are, or the supply chains take advantage of them, or B, you're an unemployed or underemployed woman or youth and you don't have access to land ownership. So you can't have a farm and participate in agriculture. So Agricycle comes in and takes this network of latent workforce capacity and applies it toward the massive amount of food that goes to waste before it ever reaches a market in Africa. So we're connecting these two things with our passive solar dehydrators. They work without electricity. We sell them to the group. We train them on how to use them, meet food safety and quality standards. We've essentially organized this workforce and organized the raw material, the food waste, and then we upcycle those products. Long story short, we create brands and ingredients and we sell them in the US.
Okay, that is, first of all, really inspiring. Second of all, it's so much more than just the food. And I talk about this often with people. It's like when you have a business, you can truly help create the world that you want to create. And you are doing that. What led you to want to create this business? How did this massive movement, and I'm going to say movement because it is much more than a product, how did this start?
I wanted to work in international development college. So later years of high school, that was what I was aiming toward. Engineering was always like something that was pulling me back and forth too. I went to this leadership camp when I was 17, and my dreams of going to work in DC or Foggy Bottom or something and like working in the whole development space and policy writing got flipped on its head because somebody told me, don't you actually want to accomplish something? And the realism of, anything that's accomplished lasts either 4 or 8 years. That's only if you got it passed at the start of a term. So I instead went toward engineering because I wanted to do humanitarian engineering. And it's not a specific sect of engineering, it's more of an application. So you can have any type of skills, be it structural or water or mechanical, electrical. The point is that you're taking those skills and you're applying them to developing communities and economies and working with them to make solutions that are appropriate. So the idea is that the solution actually has them in mind rather than, some UW-Madison grad who creates the ultimate solar dehydrator that's the most efficient in the world, but it costs $2,000 and none of the tools to make it exist in the county. So I got interested in humanitarian engineering and I went to school for that, for structural, and started working with Engineers Without Borders. And that's actually where my first experience traveling abroad came from, in the highlands of Guatemala and Hoyaba, and just seeing all the food that was going to waste. We were doing fantastic work in building bridges that were destroyed in like a 28-year civil war, cutting people off from their farms. But apart from that, people, like, the whole purpose behind that was so that, if you had access to your farm, you could now make more money, but there's already a bunch of food going to waste. So my idea was, couldn't you make something that preserves that? And then, you could sell dried fruit, was the very simple idea. That spiraled into, okay, here's a dehydrator, and them saying, who cares? I can't sell dried fruit. What am I supposed to do with this? And the farmers spelled out the need for a vertically integrated business that did everything from technology and training to the export. Then on the other side, to the branding, marketing, sales, support, all of it. And so that's how Agricycle was created, just through my first 2 years of college, exploring this sort of stuff.
What was the initial reaction like when you presented this idea? It sounds like the farmers kind of led you here, but when you were like, okay, let's do this, I'm going to help you. What was that reaction like for them?
For the farmers?
Yeah.
Really positive, like incredibly. We had a year of false starts after that. So the whole model that we had been working on assumed this sort of idea that we were not experts in international development, nor in working with rural communities, and we should walk on eggshells and tiptoe around speaking to anyone who's poor, essentially. That's definitely what you're taught in college and university, and like the general idea of if you're working in a setting that has poverty, you have to, let the experts speak. So we had nonprofits that were intermediaries, and they would work with communities on our behalf, and we would travel sometimes to teach them. But ultimately, we were communicating with the nonprofit, and the nonprofit talked to the actual people who mattered. Those broke down each relationship. It was either terrible communication, the product couldn't get made to the right specs, or even just the nonprofits moved on because grant money had attracted them somewhere else, and they would literally like uproot and leave the community. So a year after that, because I wouldn't say that those were really good experiences with the communities. They were pretty pissed by the end of those. But it was when we started traveling on our own to East Africa. So I'd gotten a LinkedIn message from Francis Okot in Uganda, and we had met somebody who had parents in Kenya, and that was essentially all we needed to, great, I know I have one place that I can stay, and we'll just meet people from there and go and talk. So we flew out to Uganda on Thanksgiving break, and it was me and one of my friends who was doing this, and we started just meeting with farmers and communities and pitching, not the idea of sensitizing them and trying to understand their needs and blah, blah. Instead, it was like, hey, at this point, I have a solution that I think might work. We have a dehydrator. I will pay you X amount of money per kilogram. This is about how many mangoes. It takes about 25 mangoes to make a dried kilogram. I will pay you for infinitely amount, however many mangoes you can create. You have to pay about $100 to build this dehydrator. Are you in or are you out? And that was like the most straightforward pitch that no nonprofit had ever tried. And suddenly we had grassroots, fire sale. Everyone was talking about blue mangoes at the time. And we went from 10 contacts to a few thousand of people who were like wanting this. So it was a solution that just kind of recognized you can speak to people who are poor and they are smart enough to make their own business decisions. And yeah, so the reaction was very positive when we switched our approach to just being direct.
Okay, a lot of people first round would have just been like, hey, I guess we need to work with NGOs, and NGOs don't seem to, be the reliable source for this. Throw in the towel, next idea. What made you guys not throw in the towel and keep going?
Definitely part of it would have been some unreasonable stubbornness to it of like, we know on paper this idea works, the dehydrator works. cat. The whole thing should work. We just haven't found the right partner. And we were convinced that the issue wasn't us and it wasn't the farmers, and that was just something, it was the nonprofits, where if the nonprofits weren't working, if we cut them out, it would work. Part of it also was just this thing of, I'm not sure what my next move would have been if this idea didn't work. So I think that was a little, latched on to the idea that, this is one thing I developed that I hope it can do something. I'm not sure what else I'd be working on if it wasn't this. So we're going to push this to the end and see if it does work. So.
And did you guys have funding for this, or were you bootstrapping it all?
Yeah. So I also just want to point out that bootstrapping for a completely financial aid college student is different than bootstrapping for somebody who's been in industry for 20 years. So
totally.
It was bootstrapped by my internships, where Francis Ocott became one of our employees, and so did Patrick, and in East Africa. And I would work at my internship, and I would take the money I made and I would send it over to them, and that was their salary, and we'd split up what I would make and lower cost of living. So the math was sufficient enough to keep them going. They were not getting paid very well at all, but we had to recruit a network, and we had to get that outline of a supply chain in place. Ultimately, we could never make the product without real money, though, because the cost of packaging alone, and doing, the minimum order quantities behind a run, and then getting the fruit to one place, having a facility that we're renting that meets all the, quality standards and food safety standards. It's a lot of different pieces that required real money. So instead, we recruited up to, the 15 to 20,000s of smallholders and people who were ready. We designed the dehydrator, and we went around with that, started doing pitch competitions, and we would win $10,000 on a Wisconsin TV show. And we won $5,000 from a startup incubator. And there's those little pieces that kept the business, getting to the next stage. We got into Target Incubator after that. So that was really the turning point, where we went from, we have a bunch of people gathered together and something can be done with this if somebody please gave us money, to, hey, here's actually the brands that we're building. It's not just dried fruit from Africa. Now it's Jolly Fruit Co., a brand that's fully traceable from tree to shelf with a Find My Farm QR code. Each bag is individually packed. It's upcycled, it's sun-dried, and there's absolutely nothing added. So now we had this brand behind it. We actually started to understand what you needed to do to build a food brand, and started thinking of ourselves more of a food company than before. We were just I don't know what we thought we were as a company, but it was definitely not a food company at that point. So we walked out of Target Incubator prepared to take on an investment, and then we raised money and got that done. So that was December of 2019 when we raised our first money.
So December 2019, you're walking away, you're raising money full-heartedly that you have a food company, a packaged food company. Do you still see yourself as a food company right now?
That has evolved. I see us as a supply chain company. So kind of back to where we were in the beginning. If you were to look at something two-dimensionally on a circle, we're kind of looped back around to the supply chain. But if it's three-dimensional in a spiral that goes up, we're definitely far more advanced and have a better idea and capacity of what we're doing, but more on the side of supply chain. So with these brands, the idea was that we were going to push out a portfolio of upcycled, ethically sourced CPG brands. That was a part of the pitch. And it was going to be one brand after another, one a year, proving a new thing we could do, from traceable dried fruit to sustainable charcoal, to energy bars, to chips, to anything that could be mass market appeal enough, but still have, the functional benefits of our ingredients. The idea is that by having a lot of brands going through the same supply chain, we'd reduce the cost of goods of them overall, because it's using some of the same overhead and lower minimum order quantities to get a 40-foot container to move. We broke that down further, saw two things. Number one, it's super expensive to launch a brand and to grow that, and slotting fees alone. If you want to go retail and that's where the volume is, well, be prepared to shell out a bunch of money at the start of that. The second thing was that it didn't need to be our products that we're going through. The impact that we're having is that we pay women and farmers and youth and refugees directly within 0 to 2 days after we pick up their ingredients. They would wait for up to 120 days before to get paid less than what they were promised, and it would be a really crappy amount. But for us, we pay between 7 to 28 times what they would otherwise make. And that's because we've cut out everyone in the middle. The impact that we're having is based on purchasing the ingredients in the first place. It's not based on what brand it is on the back end or if it's Agricycle's name on a package. So we broke down the idea of, these volumes and aggregating these different things to, we have ingredients available. We have a supply chain that works better and better the more volume, the more throughput there is. And so now we've pivoted toward actually kind of following what Renewal Mill has done too and Recrained, but becoming a ingredient supplier of ethically sourced, upcycled, functional and traceable ingredients that have a real story, traceability back to the exact farm, but of 130 ingredients. And that is now meant to be a base for other brands to build their products off of. And our brands essentially prove that you can source from the bottom of the economic pyramid, from the most remote rural farmers, and that we can ensure their standards. So that's where the company's gone since.
I love that. And I love what you said about the fact that you're making it available to everyone, but you're continuing to keep your brands as the case study, that it can be done, that people want this, that it absolutely is feasible, because getting people to shift isn't always easy. Talk to me about people that are coming to you for these products as ingredients, or like the ingredients themselves. Are they coming to you, or are you guys reaching out to them to say, hey, have you thought about making your product more sustainable? Here's a way to do it.
Yeah. So the inbound side has been successful with some of the PR that we got recently. We walked away with winning the Food Bites 2020 pitch competition for CPG, and that put us in front of a lot of huge players that we never had access to before. And so we're actually working with 4 of the people and sponsors of that event to roll out 2 products and fill in some of their ingredient gaps too. And also just replacing a few ingredient supply chains, because in this whole picture, we're able to pay the farmers better, but our costs are actually less than what the standard prices are on like green banana flour, cassava flour, sweet potato flour, all that. So better claims, same or less prices, generally the thing. So we've had good inbound from that sort of stuff. I think we're trying now to, and I was just telling you right before this call, but I was, redoing my pitch deck and trying to capture all of this. We're now focused on product formulation, on leveraging our brands as more demonstrations themselves, and starting to try to get in front of different people and say like, hey, we exist, we're an option if you want a better supply chain, like we're one of your top choices. So that's what we're starting to do, and that leads into the outbound. So we've been really successful at reaching out to small brands and saying, hey, we already have containers that come over. If you're fine with not being on your own schedule, essentially, as a very tiny brand, if you're fine with not being on your own schedule, our minimum order quantity could be a pallet of a product, either as a fully co-packed, or it could just be the ingredients themselves and be like 500 kilograms or something, so 1,200 pounds. So yeah, that's some of the ways that we're reaching out to small startups that in the same way that an investor looks at or like a venture investor would look at startups that 1 out of every 7 or 1 out of every 10 is going to blow up and be big. If we're the ingredient supplier of 10 small startups, one of them is going to become massive, and that means that ideally we do a good job and our supply chain works with them, and now we're supplying a massive volume, all of that bought at an outsized price from smallholders.
You have such an all-encompassing view of this. Is that just your natural way of viewing business, viewing life, or is that something that you've developed as you have kind of grown in this business?
I think I would never be good at running a SaaS tech product that had one single, could have multiple, features on it, but had one single, mission or something that it was supposed to accomplish. And that its success would be based on how narrowly defined it was, because it would get acquired by somebody who was doing, some bigger overarching thing. I could never be good at building a individual, niche consumer brands that would have the strongest of followings out there and get acquired for 20x because, it's just, they did such a good job with what they were doing. I think my strength, this also leads to a ton of issues, but is building out a larger system and connecting all the dots together. So an ethical startup or an ethical food company might look at sourcing from, Africa or Southeast Asia or Latin America, from parts, and would say, hey, I'm just going to make sure that, I'm purchasing snack bars from here, or some of my ingredients are coming from here. Like there would be barely any verification. They would accept the fact that they're only dealing with primarily male landowners who own plantations compared to real small farmers. Fair trade is garbage. If you actually go through what their certifications are, the people who started fair trade left fair trade. So yeah. We're from the bottom up trying to change who can be a part of agriculture, how it works, making sure that it's always upcycled, it's better for the environment. Like the whole system ties together. And then on the back end, I haven't talked about this, and this is why we're more supply chain than a food company right now. But now that we've aggregated tens of thousands of farmers, women, youth, refugees, and their family members, in an area like Western Kenya, and we have a supply chain that picks up from them. So, we have an empty truck that goes out and picks up stuff from collection points, from village empowerment centers is the name they gave them. And they go place to place, and cooperatives are created that aggregate the product to those village empowerment centers in the first place. If you were to take a video of that entire process and you were to play it backwards, like in reverse, we have a last mile distribution system that takes something from capital cities all the way to the most rural, remote households in a village. And that's something like Bill Gates has not been able to accomplish in 20 years. And that's because, all his solutions have been, I'm going to build a last mile supply chain. And why don't people want, access to vaccines and cheaper medicine, and et cetera? Instead, we incentivize people to do it by paying them for the products they have. We're now taking those empty trucks and filling it with cheaper and verified agricultural inputs. So seeds, feeds, fertilizers, fuels. We're putting solar electricity units on it for the people who are now making more money. Doesn't mean they have access to be able to buy that stuff. So now we work with other partners who have focused on a technology and on a financing structure, but they have absolutely zero, network and capacity to get this out there. So now we're putting solar electricity units, and people are buying them at a 20% discount, and the fertilizer gets to them at a 50% discount. And so all these things, we're able to take a cut of that, but it's always at a discount to them and the groups that are selling the stuff to us in the first place. They're now able to reach ideally the people they've always wanted to, because our truck is already paid for. Essentially, like it was profitable to begin with, just doing the ingredients. So yeah, that's the back end of it. So to answer your question, I've always made things more complicated than what somebody might think is smart to begin with, but we've managed to create bigger outsized value from that for Agricycle.
Yeah. And it seems like that's like a value of yours that's important, is impact, and how can I make this as efficient as possible, but also as beneficial to everyone along the way. And I get that. And I'm really big on your business should 100% embody your values. It's an extension of you in a lot of ways. And you've done a really great job of having so many aspects of the business be able to embody that, those values that you have of making real impact in as many ways as possible, which is fantastic.
Yeah. My vision for what Agricycle is able to do is to become, if you're to buy ingredients from Agricycle, you're buying ingredients not just from a fair trade certified, supplier, or it's not just women or youth, it's not just upcycled, but you're buying from a supply chain that is then able to create access to, clean and affordable energy, medicine, vaccines, digital healthcare, affordable inputs, better margins, respects the rights of the poor in terms of not locking them into exclusivity, paying within 0 to 2 days, like an entire system that I don't think any other food supply chain can speak to right now, that their members are getting healthcare because of what they're doing. So that's what I want Agricycle to become.
That's massive. That's great. How long have you guys been at it?
So the idea became a real idea in the spring of 2016.
Got it.
started an LLC in October 2017. So I'd say that's the real start of it, was when we originally did not want to be a company, thought that it was a terrible conflict of interest. And how could you be for profit when you're trying to be nice? And definitely grew up out of that. That was primarily driven by how much it sucks to start a nonprofit. And there was a $600 application fee, which we did not have. And to start an LLC in Wisconsin, it was free. So
there you go.
Part of the driver. But also just realizing that, the only way that we were going to scale, we got this really good advice of, so you're working with poor people in Africa. And we were like, yeah, it's definitely way more than that. But yes, in general. And they were like, okay, how are you going to compete with the millions of other organizations doing that for the small amount of donations that go toward it? I was like, man. He's like, I mean, you guys are college kids. There's no way that you're going to attract the responsible money of donations. So that was part of it, of like, okay, yeah, we have to create our own system that's going to sustain itself. And suddenly social entrepreneurship made sense, in that we weren't reliant on donors and we could scale. Like, it's not just about being able to tread water, it's about being able to swim toward the destination. So we had to be able to grow and invest that back in. And venture capital is an amazing tool for, it came way too late in some senses, but it also came at the perfect time, because we figured so much out without it, even if it was a huge struggle. So it came in such an outsized way compared to any sort of donation or nonprofit thing we could have had. And that started it up just enough to start making our own revenue and profit. And that's how it's grown. So
I love it. Everything seems to have fallen in place. And I'm so happy that you guys got to, came to the piece that you could have profit and impact at the same point. I think a lot of people really do struggle with that. And what I love about you guys growing as massive as you can is that you show that is possible. And that is, like, people need example of that, because the two can 100% be together. And you are showing that. Is there any, like, did it take a little bit of getting okay with that at the beginning? Or once you guys saw, like, okay, we can have profit and impact together, this makes sense? Or was there still a little bit of, like, internal misalignment to how you were operating?
I'd say the misalignment came from it was more of like a switch went off when I realized that startups, or being for profit but for good, was A, possible, and B, a good thing. I'd say that I had more difficulty getting over the idea of, like, startup culture or calling myself a CEO. For the longest time, I refused to use the term CEO. And I was like, I'm a founder. I've created an idea and we're doing this thing, but I didn't want to be one of the people who tossed on a CEO hat and we're selling this big idea and everything I've done, and it's in the basement of their parents' kitchen. That didn't make sense, but you know what I mean. So point is that I didn't want to be calling myself something bigger than what it was. And I was very uncomfortable with what I found to just be the reality, is that you have to sell where you're going and yourself one step ahead of where you are than what you're doing right now. Because if what I was doing right now is, hey, I have dried fruit from Africa and I think it could sell in retail stores, that is not at all what would raise money. And it didn't. Those pitches failed wholeheartedly and never got anywhere. But when it was like, hey, I have a vertically integrated supply chain that we're going to create a portfolio of the next generation of brands that meet, ethical standards across the board. Even though we changed from that and we found that there was a better way and that was tedious in itself, but it was a bigger idea, even though we weren't there. Obviously, we needed money to get there. We needed time. We needed to learn stuff and screw up. But it was an uncomfortability with talking about what the future held when I hadn't even done much actual work today. We had a network of tens of thousands of people, and I had never paid more than 50 of them money. We didn't have a market to bring it to, and I didn't have money to pay them just to eat a bunch of dried fruit myself. So it felt uncomfortable selling what it could be when we weren't, the main thing yet. I've definitely learned since then, and, we've grown a lot. So it works now. We are paying thousands of people, but it took realizing that it wasn't lying or it wasn't being deceitful or anything. It was talking about the thing people wanted to understand, not just because they had, rose tinted glasses, but they wanted to see where this whole thing was headed. You want to get on the boat that's actually going somewhere instead of just, doing a lap. So that's that's where some uncomfortability came from during that time.
Yeah, I think a lot of founders definitely deal with that struggle of stepping into that role of CEO and selling the vision. But I think you've done a great job with it. And clearly, because you guys seem to have been winning a ton of pitch decks and you've raised money, or pitch competitions and you've raised money. What's your secret to winning pitches? Is it selling the vision of where you're going? Because this is like something that also helped make the company possible at the beginning. What's your secret sauce for pitching?
Yeah. So for pitching, it's definitely been based on the vision. And then if you get somebody wrapped up in the vision and so excited about it and wanting it to work out just from hearing, the pitch, and then, in the last 45 seconds of the pitch, you just, because there's always a time limit. So the last 45 seconds, that's just when you pummel them with like in 500 stores, United Nations Food and Agriculture, blah, blah, blah. And like, you just toss out a bunch of names in an order that doesn't make sense. You're not even using verbs between them. And you've just said the words and you're like, thank you so much. I hope you have a great day. And like that seems to have worked for us in a few cases where we're not actually explaining a whole lot. We're just like, if you believe in this thing and you hear that what we just said at the end, which are true things, but like are great accomplishments and are evidence that the thing works in the first place, then, I hope you vote for us, or like get us to the next round at least, or get me to a Q&A where I can show you that there's an actual business. But it's a very complicated thing to try to explain in a pitch competition where they're normally looking for like, dear God, if it's open to anybody, then we're against tech, and tech is so simple to explain. Or if it's, food, it's, individual brands that have super strong, consumer focuses, and it's innately compelling because they're a brand and like they focused on that. So our thing has been selling this big idea, talking about the scope of it, the problem, talking about how perfect glove fit our solution is, and then tossing out a bunch of like accolades in the last 30 or 45 seconds and hoping that there's a Q&A.
Well, it seems to be working for you, so that's great. Keep it up.
Yeah. I didn't expect to actually have advice about it, but when you asked if there was like a pattern that we had, I think that's it. It's more of like, toss it all out.
Okay, I feel like there's probably a ton of challenges that you have had to overcome with this, just in the nature of the business. And heck, food and bev, a simple brand, there are a ton of different challenges. What's one of the challenges that you guys have had to face that you really did not see coming, and how did you overcome that?
The resistance to work culture changes with some of our team in East Africa has been massive. So generally, and please take this as like, general, statement and summary, but the work culture in East Africa, can only speak there, is laggard in terms of ambition. Like you don't show up to work trying to get something done. You show up to work and then, you leave. And if something happened during it, cool. That's a thing that happened. We have brought on ambitious people who have hated that culture and have wanted something else, wanted to actually do something. And then they're like, holy crap, this mission's amazing. So it's interesting because, for the Americans on our team, like they want that thing too. They're coming from corporate America, or coming from, an agency, and they're like, it didn't move fast enough, blah, blah, blah. But comparatively, America's moving pretty fast. So in East Africa, it's half just the work culture has been the attraction compared to the mission, where in the US, most of the mission, the work culture is like an awesome thing. But when we brought people on, even though they're of a completely different mindset, in their head and of what they desire and want, they want something that moves fast and that can do all these things. The like learned lessons of the past 5 to 20 years of working in corporate, industrial settings in East Africa has just been so hard to like pull out. So the example would be in our supply chains, we set a deadline for a shipment. 40-foot container needs to go out by this date, bar none. Like you are drying your own fruits if it's not ready. We missed a deadline like a couple weeks ago. And this wasn't a deadline that affected any customers. It was actually just our product. So it affected our ability to stock on shelves and everything and to restock some of our online sellers. So that sucked and that's terrible. And like normally to, brand, that would be like yelling at the supplier. But on the supplier side, for still with us, we were dumbfounded by like, we kept saying this cannot happen, not just cannot happen, but like, what can we do? Is sourcing okay? Like trying to make this work. And it took flights out there to figure out that they were like, oh, we missed the shipment deadline and we have another shipment coming in 4 weeks. So we're just going to combine them. And we were, what? Where did that come from? And somehow this term or this phrase had come out of like the buyers gave us another month. And we were like, we're the buyers. I'm not sure, where this idea came from that another month suddenly, there's not a 13th month, that this didn't happen. And so it was learning that it's just an example of where kind of these things of, oh, well, we missed a deadline, so we'll just fall back on the next deadline rather than the deadline is still 2 days ago. That just means like all your efforts need to be to get this out. So it's been little things like that our team has been very open about. Once we finally uncover it, they're like, wow, no, that's definitely not how we would have done it here. Deadline's missed, wait till the next. So yeah, that's been some of the challenges. It's our biggest challenges are with our supply chain. Obviously, we're doing this very distributed rural supply chain. And I'd say just one of the unique ones has been some of the like learned practices that some of our team has been trying to get out of, even though they desire to have this like different outlook, but there's still some practices that crop up like that functionally like throw the company back. And then I have to explain like, okay, if we don't have the product to sell for 2 weeks, we're basically, we're having the same burn rate, right? We're, the same salary, the same, software costs, the same infrastructure. We're not making any forward progress for 2 whole weeks. Basically, like we're losing money just by not, moving this forward. It's not that it was too expensive or something. It was just, we're not going to fire people or lay anyone off for 2 weeks. So we're just kind of stuck. And it was that sort of explanation where people are like, oh, wow, yeah, that mathematically makes sense. And yeah, long story short, that's just one of the challenges.
Yeah, that's got to be such an interesting one because the cultural differences are quite drastically different, and trying to bring it all together. I'm so excited to see the impact of what that is going to look like in the future. And again, like how that is going to impact the greater community as well, as more people maybe adopt these type of ways of thinking and ways of operating. How does that then trickle into the communities as well, as they then talk to their neighbor about it, talk to their friends, talk to their family, and just, you don't know what you don't know. So for them to like see, well, this is why we do it, and see the bigger picture. And it's actually really interesting as you talk about that too, given the fact that there always seemed to be before you guys a whole bunch of middlemen that potentially people were just seeing their silo so small that they've never had the opportunity to see the large picture, which you're now making available to them. It's painful. It's painful as you're doing it 100%. But that's really interesting to be able to shift that mindset to allow people to look at things from a bigger picture, which I think will help you guys in the long run. But yeah, some painful pieces in the meantime, I'm sure.
Yeah. Thank you. I just point out too that, if it's not the middlemen and the silos, it's Largus filled nonprofits that, their funding is secured for the next 3 years. They're sitting on $20 million and things don't have to happen to continue. Yeah. They write a report of, hey, it wasn't as effective as we hoped, and they might get a little less money the next time, but the money's coming most of the time. And that, you might have somebody from the NGO world push back on that, but from my experience, the mindset is that accepting that things take a long time and then moving at that pace rather than saying this company will shut down if we're not able to make things move faster. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's like the other mindset that crops up, or background.
Yeah, absolutely. You are just getting such an interesting perspective on so many different pieces of industry in the world, and like all the different moving parts with this business, which is such a great piece. For anyone who is starting out a food company, ingredient company, wanting to make an impact in the world in a bigger way through food in some way, what advice would you have for them?
First piece of advice would be you can go a lot longer without resources than you probably think you can. So, I mean, you need to do farmers markets for a little while to learn all the mistakes before you go and actually make a real package. And you need a crappy package with a bad graphic design on it that, is not eco-friendly first to figure out your stuff before you move on to the next stage of making the design better and having, more expensive eco-friendly package. And there's just a realism to starting small and figuring out the ideas. And that is not at all what I wanted to do. I strove to make something way bigger, but nobody was ready to fund it because we hadn't figured out our stuff yet. So we were forced into doing this. I'm more of saying that it's totally acceptable to do this. And your idea doesn't have to be launched in the next 12 months, in stores or something. That there can be a longer road to incremental improvement and everything and getting it ready. The second thing I'd say is that if you're near any sort of metropolitan area, there is support there from universities who have small funds or pitch competitions. Everyone has a pitch competition now. And that just, at the very least, gives you a YouTube video. Have somebody record it, YouTube video, post it, make a video on LinkedIn, and people will start liking your stuff and you'll get in front of the right people. But there's resources out there, even if it's not money, to cheaper packaging, to somebody who will give you a lower minimum order quantity, to somebody who will tell you that your food tastes like garbage. So just that there's a lot of stuff out there, and a lot of cities are trying to create these sorts of resources to incentivize new business. And just that there's so much starting out that you can use before you need to pour in your own money. And I guess I'm talking to people who don't have their own resources here, because if you have $100,000 that you're willing to put in yourself, then a lot of this is kind of moot. Take your time launching it, but you don't need as many resources. But for the people who don't have the resources, there are lots of things out there, even in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So,
Josh, thank you so much for sharing all of this. I am personally so inspired by your story, and I'm so thrilled that you could share it with everyone listening. I think it's a great example of how food can make the world a better place in so many ways, and how we can truly change. You can change the world with food and with business. And so I'm so excited that leadership camp that you went to changed your mind about the direction to go, and that you have kept riding this oftentimes bumpy road to continue to bring this forward and really change the world with your product. And I mean that wholeheartedly. So thank you. And yeah, definitely look forward to watching you grow and seeing the impact that Agricycle continues to make.
Thank you so much. It was really great being on here.
That's it for this week, Food Friend. Thanks for tuning in. If the show helped you in any way, please go ahead and leave a rating or review of the show below. I also want to thank our sponsor one more time, the Food Brands That Sell program, the program to transform how you navigate the CPG industry and ultimately sets you up for success within it. Go ahead and get yourself on the waitlist using the link below, or you can put yourself on the waitlist at foodbrandsthatsellwaitlist.com. Catch you next time, Food Friend.